On November 4th, 1979, a group of Iranians stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran, Iran, capturing and imprisoning 52 Americans in what became known as the Iranian hostage crisis. I'll go into that event in a future video if you guys want me to, but today I'm going to explain why Iran found it necessary to storm the US Embassy. Can you guess which three-letter organization made the Iranians angry? Yeah, it was the CIA. This is the story of Operation Ajax. The background for this operation is pretty complicated, so I'll just go over it as simply as possible. Basically, in the early 1900s, a British company struck oil in Iran. This company was then essentially bought out by the actual British government after World War I. The British only gave Iran around 15% of their profits, keeping the rest, which is obviously not a very good deal for Iran, considering it's their oil, it's from their country. Moving away from oil, though, for now, in 1921, the Iranian government was overthrown in a coup d'etat by a general named Raza Khan, who quickly became the prime minister of the country. He also convinced the Iranian parliament to remove the current Shah of the country and appoint him the Shah, which is like a figurehead with only limited power. It's like he was the president and also like a king at the same time. In 1935, he changed the name of the country from Persia to Iran, but I've called it Iran throughout the video just for the sake of not confusing people. Skipping forward a little bit, now it's 1941, and Germany has just invaded the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa. The British and the Soviets essentially invaded Iran and basically kicked out the Shah, the prime minister guy, Raza Khan, and appointed his son instead, as they believed he would be much easier to control. Khan's son was pretty laid back as a ruler, and as such, a lot of the authoritative policy his father had introduced was rolled back, meaning Iran was once again a democracy. In 1949, an assassination attempt caused the Shah, who is Raza Khan's son, to reconsider his laid-back approach. He created the Iranian Senate, appointing half of the members himself, appointing those who were essentially just going to vote for whatever he wanted them to do. Now, a man named Mohammad Mosaddegh, the Minister of Finance, saw this and was outraged with the Shah's sudden consolidation of his power. Mosaddegh banded together with other opponents of the Shah's policy and formed a coalition known as the National Front. They ended up winning the majority of the actually elected seats in Iranian parliament, meaning they would be able to elect the future prime minister. Now, there was a prime minister at the time, but he was assassinated, and then the assassin was pardoned after Mosaddegh became prime minister, so take that as you will. Anyway, we're getting really close to the end of the history part of this video, so let's get on to the Shah and the new Prime Minister Mosaddegh did not get along. While the Shah believed in taking power for himself, Mosaddegh believed in the Shah becoming more of a figurehead than a ruler, and believed in Iran becoming a full democracy. But seriously though, Mosaddegh seemed like a pretty nice guy from everything I've read. I'm not sure if he was involved in the whole killing the previous prime minister thing. At least he only assassinated one figurehead. It's okay. The Shah became so angry with Mosaddegh that he actually removed him as prime minister and temporarily replaced him with a man named Ahmad Kavam. I don't know how to say that one. I haven't looked that one up, and it's hard to put on headphones when I have this on. But Mosaddegh was so popular that the Shah was forced to reinstate him after he was kicked out. Anyway, right now, it doesn't really seem like there's any reason for the CIA to get involved with what Mosaddegh is doing. He is just the prime minister. He was elected. The other guy might have gotten assassinated, but he was elected by actual people, not put in power or anything like that. So what is the issue that the CIA would have with it? Well, you remember those British oil companies I mentioned earlier, and I said I'd get back to those? Well, Mosaddegh didn't really like how the British were stealing Iran's natural resources, and Iran was getting very little out of it. Mosaddegh wanted to nationalize oil and have the British pay larger cuts of their profits, specifically splitting the profits 50-50, which that's kind of fair. Britain, of course, refused this proposal because they like money and immediately began a plan to overthrow the Iranian government. Let me just say that the Americans didn't initially want to get involved in this, okay? They thought it was a bad idea, but yeah, they got involved. After Mosaddegh said he wanted to split the oil 50-50, the British ceased oil production in Iran, instead opting to forbid their people from sending British exports there, freezing Iran's British bank accounts, and stopping ships leaving Iran with oil. Tens of thousands lost their jobs in the oil fields because the British would not let Iran sell its oil. The nail in the coffin was when British intelligence found like 2 communists in Mossadegh's party, and with that information they were able to convince the United States that Iran would fall to the commies if they didn't do something about it. Trust me, bro, it's not about the oil. Keep in mind, this was in 1953, and that's all you needed to tell the US for them to commit some devious acts. They're communist guys. The CIA talked to the Shah and convinced him to write an imperial decree that would strip Mosaddegh of his power and instead appoint General Fazlollah Zahedi instead. Sorry, I didn't look up how to pronounce that either. Sorry, guys. Zahedi was a man who they'd paid to basically do whatever the CIA wanted once he hopefully was successful in their coup. However, Mosaddegh was pretty liked, so the CIA and MI6 wanted to prime the people of Iran to accept a new prime minister and the return of the Shah to power. So they embarked on one of the largest psychological operations of all time. Basically, get everyone to hate Mosaddegh. A man named Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of President Roosevelt, was in charge of CIA ground operations in Iran. Roosevelt paid entire groups of protesters to destroy symbols of the Shah. Despite having his own problems, was still considered to be the symbol of Iran. They paid off news organizations to denounce and slander Mosaddegh to a ridiculous degree, but Mosaddegh did not stop them, as he believed that silencing the free press would only hurt Iran's democracy. But trust me, bro, he's a communist. It's not about the oil. CIA agents in Iran faked being communists, and they threatened Muslim leaders, saying they would punish them if they wouldn't support Mosaddegh. So they didn't support Mosaddegh because they were mad they were being threatened. In some documents, it also says, allegedly, CIA, this is a joke, it was all in Minecraft, they CSGO'd a guy's house, pretending to be communists. After all of this and more, the CIA believed they had done enough and finally convinced the Shah to go forward with the coup. The Shah signed the two imperial decrees, one to remove Mosaddegh from power, and the second to replace Mosaddegh with Zahedi, I don't know his first name, sorry, who was the general mentioned earlier. After sending his signed decrees, the Shah took a very convenient week-long vacation in northern Iran, away from the chaotic coup that was about to commence. Nematollah Nasiri, the commander of Iran's Imperial Guard, delivered the royal decree to Mosaddegh, and Mosaddegh accepted it and stepped down. Just kidding. He had the guy arrested. He just said, no, you can't do that. You don't have the consent of parliament. And that was kind of it for the first coup. After this, the Shah had to flee to Baghdad. After the coup fell through, the CIA was supposed to call it quits and leave, but not our true American patriots. Roosevelt decided to start a second coup. He got in touch with General Zahedi, who was on the run from Mossaddegh's government, and using more CIA money, they paid off even more protesters to violently protest in the streets in favor of Mossadegh. Then they paid off more protesters for the Shah's side, basically had them fight little wars on the streets of Tehran, showing Iran that Mossaddegh just couldn't keep control of the country. Then, pretending to be just random Americans, convinced Mossaddegh to issue a decree temporarily banning all protests. Because of this, Zahedi and the men loyal to him took the opportunity to fight back Mossadegh supporters and used the Shah's supporters to invade government buildings across the city. Mohammad Mosaddegh surrendered after a tank shell was shot into his house, ending the coup in his time as prime minister. No, he didn't die. They just shot it through his house. I don't know. The Shah, enjoying a stay in Italy at the time, was flown back to Iran by Alan Dulles, the then director of the CIA. Mossaddegh was sentenced to death, but the Shah changed his sentence to 3 years in solitary confinement, followed by the rest of his life under house arrest. The Iranians didn't know right away how much of a part the Americans had played in the two coups, but eventually they would find out. The Shah obviously had no problem with the Americans. They were the reason he his power once more. General Zahedi actually resigned from being prime minister after only a couple of years, but the Shah stayed in power, ruling with secret police and living in luxury while many Iranians starved. The Iranians led an uprising against the Shah in 1978, and in 1979 he was forced to leave the country, which is where I'll leave this story for now. Definitely more on him next video. By this point, Iran knew they had been duped by the Americans, and President Obama said decades later, "For many Iranians, the coup demonstrated duplicity by the United States, which presented itself as a defender of freedom, but did not hesitate to use underhanded methods to overthrow a democratically elected government to suit its own economic and strategic interests." Kind of fire. Also, they didn't even admit to this until like 2012 and still have a lot of classified information about the specifics. But anyways, subscribe for part 2 where I talk about the Iranian hostage crisis. See you guys. Bye-bye.